3 years after their previous release, the Russo brothers have now released another film, with them now claiming their third film within the top 15 most expensive of all time. The Electric State hit Netflix not too long ago, so now today we're going to be ranking all of the Russo brothers films, both MCU and non-MCU. I ran out of time to include their short films, so we're just going to be sticking to feature length this time. So if you have seen those short films, please let me know how they are down below. The Russos have had mixed reception following their departure from the MCU, so naturally when things go wrong, you go back to where it went well. So The Electric State marks the Russos' last film before they go back and direct 2 Avengers films, so that should be interesting to see how those ones pan out. But today we're going to be focusing on what they have made already and ranking them from worst to best. Alongside those short films, if you could also leave your ranking down below, that would be great, because I love seeing other people's thoughts. But without further delay, let's get into my ranking of all 9 Russo brother films.
I asked the guy, why you so fly? He said, funky cold Medina.
When I made this video previously, Yumi and Dupree was bottom of the list, and fast forwarding 3 years, it is still bottom of my list. This was quite a miserable experience watching this film, to be honest. It's one of their earlier films, and it just doesn't have anything going for it, to be honest. Yumi and Dupree is listed as a romantic comedy, yet I found it didn't really hit either of those. You know, the comedy never hits. Owen Wilson is quite annoying in this film, to be honest, and then when it does focus on those romantic side of things, it's about this relationship crumbling, which is just quite a sour experience. It doesn't even feel that based in reality, as Owen Wilson's just doing so many unnatural things to try and come across as a slacker and a real problem in these people's lives. And on top of that, Kate Hudson and Matt Dillon just argue the entire film, and it's just, as I said, quite miserable to watch. You'd think having Michael Douglas there would at least add some charm to it, but he kind of just contributes to that toxicity of that romantic side of things, and just, again, makes this such a miserable film to watch. Next up, we have The Electric State, which, to be honest, a lot of people may find controversial for not being in last place, because it offers very, very little, especially given the support behind it. The Russos' post-MCU record continues to falter with yet another underwhelming film, and to be honest, there's not many excuses. Electric State had a gigantic $320 million budget, and alongside that an A-list cast and a book to adapt, you know, so they've had it all written out for them. They weren't starting from scratch, and yes, I know a large portion of this budget's probably gone on this cast, but you'd expect some success and have high expectations when appointing them, yet nothing was utilised to its potential. The general story of Electric State lends itself to some solid commentary, and when you combine the robot gimmick, it can appeal more to a younger audience. So right there you have a recipe for success by, you know, taking a serious matter and kind of translating it into a younger audience's view for them to understand it a bit better. But no, this film doesn't do that. There is no cohesion with that, and the film can't decide what avenue it wants to go down, whether it wants to tackle the darker source material or if it just wants to play into being more for kids. It kind of dabbles in both. You know, we get some quite dark imagery and story beats, but then we also have stupid humor. We have obviously the robots, which are part of it, but they're played to be more towards kids, so you get this awkward blend of the two where it doesn't really feel fully mature enough for an adult, but then it doesn't feel fully directed towards kids, because you still have some unsettling things, especially in the final act, but nonetheless we are left with a mess. You can definitely feel that budget when it comes to the action sequences and the CGI, because they look great, to be honest, but it's just everything else which is a big disappointment. You know, I mentioned there's a tonal inconsistency, but even those actors, the big names that were brought in, just don't feel like they care enough, and I don't know if that's down to them actually not caring enough or the script, because it was paper thin, it allowed no development for these characters and generated plenty of awkward moments with dialogue. Despite all of the support and investment behind this film, there's just no soul to it. It's very hollow, and the budget just feels like it's gone purely on what you see on screen. You know, if you put this film on mute, yeah, this film looks great from a visual point of view, but everything else, it's very disappointing, especially given that gargantuan budget.
Chips, da-ti-do-di-do, chi-boom.
Next up, we actually have the Russo's first feature film, and it's quite a harmless one, to be honest. You know, it's not really doing too much at the end of the day. Welcome to Collinwood is filled with great actors once again, but just like The Electric State, not as bad. It just can't pick an avenue. It doesn't know which film it wants to be, whether it wants to be more quirky or if it wants to be more of a serious drama. So we're stuck in that kind of middle gap where it's just kind of awkward, to be honest. And where this film is quite harmless is, while it does do that, it has quite a short runtime, and not much really happens in that short runtime. There are plenty of scenes where you could just pluck them out and it wouldn't change anything at all. It just kind of feels like padding for making this film longer, and yeah, just there's not much going for it, to be honest. The characters are well written and they do actually get some good development, but elsewhere in terms of the story and the direction this film goes in, it's quite harmless and doesn't really do too much, to be honest. Doesn't really commit many sins, you know, it suffers tonally and where it wants to go, but other than that, there's nothing bad about it. It's just kind of a harmless film which, to be honest, you don't really think about after watching. Next up, we have The Grey Man. Now, I know plenty of people hate this film or just don't really like it at all. I hear that, but I don't think it's as bad as anyone's saying. In fact, I had an alright time with it. The issue with this is the expectation, you know. The Russos were still new off of Endgame, there'd been a pandemic. Again, this was another very expensive film, not to mention a great cast, yet it didn't do too much that we hadn't seen already. All of this film's components were taken out of other spy properties such as James Bond, Jason Bourne, or even Mission Impossible. It's stuff that we've already seen before, just put into a new film. There's great moments, especially with the action and visually, even if they do use too many drone shots. The Grey Man doesn't stand on its own 2 feet. Whenever you think about this film, it's stuff that you've seen in other films. I think the action was great, like you expected that with the Russo's track record, especially with The Winter Soldier. And Chris Evans was great as a villain for once. I know we've seen that in Knives Out, but from the get-go he was a villain here and it was great. He had a strong charisma about him. But other than those aspects, The Grey Man doesn't do too much in terms of uniqueness. So you can have fun with it, but it's not original at all. If you want to see good spy content, you'll watch other films, as not only are they better, but they do the things and this film does a lot better as well. So it was a bit disappointing, especially given the budget, the cast, just like Electric State, but I still think you can have some fun with it, but it is one you don't really rewatch all that much. A brand new day. Expectations were sky high for Cherry, coming off the back of the Russo success with Endgame, and not to mention Tom Holland being one of the big names back in 2021. So it was understandable to see everyone's disappointed reaction to Cherry, although saying that, I did enjoy it more than a lot of people did. I completely hear the criticisms, but I don't think they tampered the whole experience as much as it has for others. I think it was slightly dramatic and I still enjoyed Cherry. This film isn't talked about that much today, and it's quite a shame. I still think there's some strong qualities here, such as Tom Holland's acting, but I think it is those expectations which kind of tarnished the reputation of this film. It definitely does feel like the Russos knew that they had eyes on them after their success in the MCU, so they needed to make a big statement, a big film, but because of that, it kind of feels like they over-stylized it, and it feels like they were trying to impress with every single shot, which got quite exhausting and kind of an attempt to distract you from the lack of substance and emotion in certain scenes. I mentioned Tom Holland doing a fantastic job here, and he really goes through it in this film and gives us a perspective on such a troubled individual, and in the process performing a very versatile role. It was cool seeing him do something outside of what he's done before this, and it gives me confidence for his projects going forward which aren't in the MCU, such as Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. Film did feel a bit clunky with its transitions throughout the life of Tom Holland's character. You know, there's definitely different stages that are focused on throughout, and the kind of natural transition into those was not subtle, and not to mention we had narration from Tom Holland for the entire film, and it kind of just explained what we already knew and seeing on screen, and it just kind of felt like you weren't trusted enough as a viewer to understand what was happening. So the narration felt a bit unnecessary, but I still think there are plenty of aspects within Cherry to enjoy. The film isn't afraid to focus on the darker aspects such as PTSD, drug addiction, just to name a few, and I think the actors lived up to the challenge. And yes, while the cinematography was good, it was too much distracting from what was actually going on screen, so that's where Cherry kind of let me down, but I still enjoyed it at the end of the day. And that leads us on to our top 4, and if you do the process of elimination, that does leave us with only MCU films left, so kind of tells us the Russo's best content has been within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Take with that what you will, I'm not going to say anything, but our next entry is Captain America: The Winter Soldier, a film which people may have higher on their list, but as I said, funny enough, in my last video, while I do enjoy it a lot, I don't enjoy it as much as those other people. I love the grounded approach to this film, which felt very in line with those other spy films that I've mentioned earlier on in this video. It was nothing we'd had in the MCU before, and to be honest, nothing since which has felt as strong. The action is superb, goes without saying, some of the best in the franchise, but it's just written very well all around, you know. It's hard to pluck a flaw from this film, which is why I would understand people complaining that my score is too low, but it's just where I had it where it felt right for me. But yeah, brilliant film, great action. It really progresses the character of Steve Rogers into the modern day very well, having come off the bat of being frozen for God knows how many years. But yeah, it's just a very strong film on its own right, and especially when you chuck it into the MCU. Next up, we have another film that I talked about in my previous video, Captain America: Civil War. Just a massive fan of this film, as you can tell by my score. I think it really humanizes these characters a lot more and kind of brings that air of realism to the situation about these characters who, you know, fly around or wear capes or whatever. It kind of grounds it a bit and focuses on the political side of things, which is compelling from both sides, hence why they separate. You know, sometimes in these situations you have one being irrational and which has to lead to this kind of conflict, but I think in this scenario both sides raise some great points and warrants them facing off. Again, writing is so sharp and leads to so many tense scenarios and interactions between characters. Alongside that, the action is thrilling, especially when you bring in specific characters who haven't had as much screen time or screen time in this group, and it all just wraps up in a very satisfying way, which leads into our next 2 on this list. For like 5 or 4 years running now, Avengers: Infinity War is my runner-up, which may be a surprise to some people. I love this film, it's near perfect, hence my score. In fact, I don't even know where they could improve on it, but I do have it in second place. It's just a comic book fan's wet dream, to be honest. Like, we've got such an abundance of characters in the spotlight, they all get their moments. You also chuck in a menacing villain that's been built up for a couple of years now and lives up to the expectations, in fact delivers such a unique ending where he actually wins and wipes out half of existence. You know, when do you ever see a villain win in a franchise which leads to such consequences like this? But besides that, the action scenes were superb. The writing allowed for these unique situations to happen, but it felt natural, and characters conversing, all fantastic. There were such high expectations coming into this, and I think the Russos nailed it, to be honest. Could have easily gone wrong or felt like too much, but they hit the mark spot on. Which leads us to my number one pick being Avengers Endgame, which has always been number one in my lists. Regardless of how this film ages, I just always have this spot in my heart for it because, you know, I was the perfect age for this film coming out. You know, I think I was 16 and I was really invested in Marvel. MCU was, well, obviously during its peak years, and this just hit the spot perfectly. Obviously we knew everyone was going to come back, but the journey to get there was so satisfying, so fulfilling, and there was such an emotional core to it. Not as heavy on action, but I think the storytelling did its job for it, and that deprivation of action actually paid off at the end when you got one of the most highest scale battles you'll ever see. Everyone gets their moment, whether that results in their death or someone developing their character in general. I think Avengers Endgame just does it all perfectly, and I don't know if it could be improved upon, maybe removing a Hulk dab. I'm very satisfied with how it went and how it ended. Just a shame that the MCU hasn't been as successful since, but to be honest, when something peaks so high, lives up to the hype, it's going to be hard to top. So yeah, that's why I have Avengers Endgame in at number one. So there is my ranking of all 9 Russo brother films. Feel free to tell me yours down below, like I said. Now, as we can tell by this list, the Russos' projects outside of the MCU have been nowhere near as good as their ones within it. So hopefully that luck and quality returns when they direct the next 2 Avengers films. I'm unintentionally repping Doctor Doom for that. Next year is when we'll be seeing that film. Hopefully there are no delays, and we'll test to see if they still have that MCU quality within them. But yeah, thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed today, and I hope to see you in my next video.